So, hello, Day. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks for having me here, Tal. And hello, BIGVU community. I have to say, BIGVU's been become near and dear to me. I'm sure many of you have used the platform, and if you haven't, well, give it a go because it's been pretty amazing. I just did my very first TEDx talk live about a month ago, so it's still really fresh, really new. But BIGVU was one of the tools that I really used. I tell you what, I embraced it because during that process of learning the talk and refining it, it was nice to have a tool that could help me with my practice sessions, especially when you're trying to really learn and internalize a message. And so I'm honored to be here and connect with all of you. And today we're going to talk about something near and dear to me as well. And that's the idea of getting to the point. We're all looking and struggling to keep audiences engaged. Man, our feeds are just filled with content these days. And so we have that endless scroll. And if we're lucky enough to stop the scroll, just interrupt it long enough for someone to start to listen in or partake in one of our presentations or talks, we're still fighting for that attention to keep them engaged. So today I'm going to share some really useful tips, tricks, hacks, strategies, and just some general information that I think will help you be a more effective, not only communicator and speaker, but also just have a lot more fun when you're doing your talks because the message is going to be heard, understood, and hopefully taken action. So I'm going to share my screen here. One sec, get the presentation up. Here we go. If I could just have somebody that's watching, if you can just see that okay, feel free to post any questions or comments in the chat. Just a quick confirmation that you can see the screen. I think it looks good on my side, but I always love that little confirmation just to be sure I'm not missing anything. So listen, I'll give you a little bit of background on me. I've been a professional speaker now for about 5 years. And Gracie, thank you for confirming that. I've professionally for about 5 years and more as a novice for 5 years prior to that. But it's been about 11 years since I've been practicing public speaking. And more importantly, not just public speaking, not just speaking open to just general audiences, but actually having a message that I wanted to share. And I think all of us can resonate to that. We all have this feeling within us that, wow, we got a story to tell. We got a message to share. We want to create impact in the world. We're, as entrepreneurs or individuals that are leaders within our communities, our families, our organizations, it's important to be able to get a message across. But as I said before, the biggest challenge that we're dealing with is lack of clarity, which leads to lack of confidence, which ultimately can prevent us from taking action. My goal today is to help you get really clear. Also, as you gain that clarity, you then feel that confidence build within you, because as soon as you have those two things working for you, it is a lot simpler. Notice I didn't say easy because it still requires work and it still may call for you to get outside your comfort zone. But it is simpler to take action when we feel that clarity and confidence is looked after. So today we're going to cover a lot of stuff as it relates to getting to the point. I'm going to talk about the top problem in presentations, talks, speeches, talk about some of the key essential parts that make up a great presentation. I'm going to talk about a very simple speech structure. As well, how to say more by saying less. And I'm going to share just 8 quick tips on organizing your talk. Again, this sort of piggybacks the structure component. And then lastly, I know we always hear about calls to action, but I want to go beyond that. I want to invite with passion. All right? There's a subtle difference, and I'll explain that as we get closer to the end. Of course, as I'm talking today, please feel free to comment in the comments, any things, any ahas, any woes. As well, if you have any questions, I will be having time at the end to address any and all of those. All right. So what is the big problem today? We're fighting for attention, right? So we got to think about this. Who here struggles with concentrating on more than one thing at a time? And I'll let you know right now, that's kind of a trick question because 98% of people can't concentrate on more than one thing. In fact, there's some amazing studies, and if you've had the opportunity to read a book by Cal Newport called Deep Work, he goes into a lot of the studies and some of the cool breakthroughs that we've been making on the conversation around focus and ability to get to the point. So with that, when we start looking at the information coming at us, I don't know if you feel this way, but I know I do. It's almost like trying to drink from a fire hose. Maybe you've had an opportunity to listen to a speaker that speaks really, really fast at one pace, one tone the entire time. And it's really hard to catch up or to take note of the key messages because it's not landing. There's too much coming at us too quickly. I love this quote by Winston Churchill. This report, by its very length, defends itself against the risk of being read. And I love that. He just automatically presumes. I mean, how many of us have received reports or maybe received one of those really long emails or Facebook Messenger messages, right? That goes on for pages and pages. And then we're like, oh, I'll come back to this later. And we have the best of intentions, right? So here's a solution. Simplicity. It is the ultimate sophistication. Leonardo da Vinci knew this. We've heard it over and over and over again. If you think about some of the most empowering stories or impactful speeches that you've heard, it was probably a very simple message delivered in a very succinct, effective, and passionate way. I'll share some examples on that today. So here's the 6 essential parts of a speech or a talk or a presentation. Now, again, depending on your audience and the outcome you're looking to create, it's going to ultimately affect the structure or the types of dynamics that you put into a speech. But this, for general information and for general purpose of today's presentation and talk, we're going to focus on these 6 areas. We're going to talk about the hook. We'll talk about an idea. What's the key messages, the theme, how to structure it together, and then lastly, that invitation with passion, not simply a call to action. So let's talk about the hook, right? This is all about helping get people's attention. We want to get their attention, right? We want to be able to say, hey, I got something to share with you. But everyone's fighting for the attention right now. A hook is typically used to open your remarks. It connects with the audience, and it ultimately captures their attention. Now, there's lots of different techniques we can use in developing a hook, or a really quick way to bring people in so they want to hear a little bit more. One of my favorites and most effective ways of doing this, I feel, is storytelling. I mean, all of us, we've learned and we grow and we share and connect around stories. And sometimes it's those most powerful stories that inspire and motivate us or educate us, especially in fun ways. So stories are a great way to sort of bring an audience in, but give them a little bit of a window into who you are and what you're about. I do like quotations as well. Sometimes those are a powerful way to sort of bring people in, because if they resonate with the quote that you just shared, they may want to hear more. Other ones include feelings or insights that maybe you have about the audience you're speaking to. I remember a while ago, I had the opportunity to speak with a group of teens, and I got to talk about the subject of vulnerability. Now, this was really interesting because for them, it wasn't, I'll tell you, their idea of vulnerability was it's a weakness. And I think a lot of us feel that way towards that term vulnerability. And it was just so amazing because I was able to relate to them, being a father with 2 teen daughters and being someone that's not so old that I forget what it was like to be as a teenager. There was opportunity to share some stories, share some feelings, and really connect on more of an emotional level. And that's a wonderful thing to be able to do with an audience. Anybody here like to use stories and storytelling in their presentations or talks? I know there are. And I know that anybody that does that on a regular basis has probably seen some pretty inspiring conversations come as a result. So one of those things to open up. Notice that I did mention jokes. Jokes, though, it's a little bit risky. Especially if you're trying to embrace and bring an audience in. If it's a joke that's off taste or maybe a little bit questionable, or it doesn't land the way you intended, it can easily push people away as quickly as it could have invited them in. Feel free to share your hook style. Oh, I like that. Great. And yes, please share those in there. All right. So we're moving on to the second part, which is ideas. So you got this hook, you bring people in. Now you got their attention for a few seconds. So now we want to make sure we plant the seed about the idea. What is the idea of the talk? Now, here's a simple example of how I could do that today. Hi, I'm here today to talk about the role of being clear and concise in our language, in our speeches. That in itself is a succinct idea, and it ultimately summarizes the whole thing I want to be talking about today. Sorry, I just saw my screen flash and I thought I lost you guys for a second. So if I drop off, I'll be back. One thing I love about ideas is many of us are familiar with TED. Anybody a TED viewer here? I know I've been a longtime fan of TED and TED Talks for going on nearly probably 15, 16 years, as far back as I can remember. And their whole mantra is ideas worth spreading, right? Now, something that I found really fascinating about Chris Anderson and some of his research, as well as content that he's put out there around developing amazing talks, is he talks about something called a through line. Now, a through line is ultimately the main connecting theme or an anchoring idea. And what they mean by that, it's that idea that really runs succinctly throughout the entire talk. Now, this is really useful when it comes to framing or structuring your talk. You'll see this very common in plays, movies, great literature, but especially in TED Talks. It's this one idea that runs throughout the entire talk. Every talk should have a through line, and it should be identifiable. So after you've given a presentation, especially my presentation today, if someone was to ask you, hey, what was that talk like that you heard Di give on the BIGVU platform, you'd be able to say, you know what, he was talking about simplicity, getting to the point. Like very clearly, you're going to hear me mention these things throughout today's talk because it's the common theme that runs throughout. It's a nice way to make it easier to follow a speaker, but also from a memorable standpoint, it helps us as the audience to remember some of those key ideas. Share a couple of these amazing ideas from some of my favorite TED Talks. One was from Barry Schwartz. This was his. More choice actually makes us less happy. Now, isn't that interesting? Doesn't that make you think? It's like, what do you mean by that? I would want to hear more. And I did. Great TED Talk. Another one, we all are probably familiar with Brene Brown and some of her works around vulnerability. Vulnerability is something to be treasured, not avoided. And again, a very powerful idea. And she built that viral TED Talk around this one idea. Education's potential is transformed if you focus on the amazing and hilarious creativity of kids. Now, if you've seen this Sir Ken Robinson, the late Sir Ken Robinson, his TED Talk, you'll know exactly that this was the theme that ran throughout his entire presentation. And it landed so beautifully. And one of my favorites, if some of you are familiar with the term the power pose, which Amy Cuddy coined in her famous TED Talk, her key idea was with body language, you can fake it till you become it. Again, aren't these just really cool, simple, very simple ideas, but they create a little bit of curiosity in us. We want to know a little bit more. It's like, you got my attention. Please tell me more. Now, isn't that amazing? When you have an audience that's engaged with the very first words that you're sharing, you can tell they're on the edge of their seats, they're leaning in, and they're ready to receive the message you're about to share. Powerful, right? Super powerful. Now, part 3 is the actual message itself. Now, the message, right, it sort of builds on what I was just sharing. So yes, TED refers to it as a through line or a common idea that your talk is built around. The idea is often built and developed with the message itself. So it goes into a bit more detail. So here's an example. The idea, I'm here today to talk about the role of being clear and concise in our language, in our speeches. Now, the message that could build on that for myself today, specifically when I was thinking about today's presentation, this is exactly what I was thinking. By simplifying our language in our speeches, cutting out the fluff and fillers allows us as speakers to be clear, concise, and more convincing communicators. So you can see how that builds on that singular idea and starts to flesh out what could very easily be built into a full presentation or a talk or a workshop like we're doing today. Now that we've got the idea, we've got that through line, as TED will often refer to it as, plus we had they're in, we share the idea, we expand on the message. Now we want to continue to build on a theme that connects all those unique ideas together. The theme can be an image. It could be a metaphor. Maybe it's just a powerful word that adds interest to every remark or every aspect of your presentation. A single theme is all you need. Now, I have had people talk to me before and they say, well, I've got a few different themes that I want to cover in my talk. Well, that's totally doable, but I often say, think about those as little sub speeches within a main speech, right? So you have one big presentation, you could have a couple themes that are complementary, but making sure that you make it clear for your audience how those ideas connect or themes connect is very, very important. So when it comes to the structure component, just keep that in mind when I start sharing about actual structure of your talks. So a single theme could be an image. I love this image of keep it simple. Think about my word, simplicity, right? I keep talking about that today. Also, what about a metaphor? I love this image, right? It looks like someone holding a cigarette, but the shadow itself looks like someone holding a loaded gun. Powerful, right? So, how can you use your language to build on a theme around an image, a powerful word, or a metaphor? Something to think about as you're trying to communicate a complex idea and make it simpler and easier to understand. Structure. Of course, structure is so key because this is what helps us remember things, but also it's that logical sense with how our brains work. And if you think about when you were a kid, right? I mean, I don't know about you guys. I still read kids' stories. I don't know what it is. I just love the metaphors that are often shared in those children's stories. But if you think back to the once upon a time, right? We're so conditioned to hear those initial words. We know it's story time. We just get excited. We perk up, right? It's like, oh, it's story time. And we think about once upon a time, and then it takes us through a journey. And there's highs and lows and just amazing storytelling. But there is always an end that we make it to. And usually before we get to the end, there's something that we're challenged with or invited to take action on. And so structure, knowing that this is what people are conditioned to. We're used to having sort of a beginning, a middle, and an end. We want to make sure that we play within that sandbox for the most of the part because it's what we're used to processing. It's how we're used to hearing information. So just recall this as you start playing with different structures. So I'm going to give you some examples right now. It could be chronological. So you could do a past, present, future, right? Think about that. So at the beginning of your talk, you present your idea, you've got the hook, and now you're going to talk about something that happened before. Maybe you talk about something that you're doing right now, but also you're painting a picture for what it may look like in the future. So if you had a real powerful idea, and I've often seen this presented in this fashion in TED Talks, where they talk about a challenge that was experienced before, now how their life has changed or improved, but now they are also talking into the future about how what they were able to do now can now help others for years and years and potentially centuries to come. That's a cool way of sort of building a talk that many of us can relate to. Other ways that I like are sort of the challenge you are facing and your response to it. Many of us have personal stories where we've dealt with massive challenges, and yet we've worked through them. We've shown that we, like many of our human being counterparts, were very resilient. And these stories inspire and they motivate us. And often we present the challenge that we faced. And then we talk about how we overcame that challenge and what it's been able to do for not only us, but our friends, our family, our communities, and beyond. And those kind of structures are really very motivating and a wonderful way to just sort of share your emotions and your passion for what it is that you do. And in looking at the comments there, I see a lot of you use personal stories. So I'm sure you're very familiar with this structure already. Now, the simplest speech structure, period. And I remember this from my grade 8 English class, when I think way back in the day. But this is probably what you're most familiar with. Even today, when you see a lot of videos in the marketing space, little video ads, they typically follow this format as well. It's because we're very used to this. We receive it very well. We can understand it very simply. And so if we can understand it, remember what I said at the beginning, if we have clarity, it builds confidence. And if we feel confident that we know what to do next, we're going to take action. So remember, that's sort of those 3 little things that you want to hit every time. Clarity, very important. So hook, you got to get them on your bus. Have an intro and tell them where the bus is heading to. usually three main stories or potentially three different ideas with the overarching theme and idea. So you might have 3 points. So you think about it, you got point one, point two, point three that build on your main idea or your thesis, or as Ted calls it, your through. And then at the end, we typically remind them, right? We remind them about what we just told them. And we often invite them to take an action, to do something now if they feel drawn to do it. And because a lot of us, we don't really like being told what to do. I don't know about you. I struggle with that. You know, if someone say, go do this, you know, with the PowerPoint, yes, this is a PowerPoint, right? You know, people pointing at you and like, go do this. And it's like, I don't really want to be told. But if I'm invited to try something with passion, I receive that much differently. I don't know. Does anybody else relate to that? Anybody else to that idea of being told to do something versus being invited to do something? So, you know, often this is really important as a speaker, is trying to relate to your audience. So you have to imagine you're sitting in the seat, you're listening to yourself give a talk. What is it that allows you to connect with you? I know it's getting a little cerebral, right? So this is a very simple speech structure, and it's a pretty safe bet, especially if you're just getting started with these types of presentations. Oh, Brown Girls Travel. Thanks for the comment. I agree. I like being invited. Now, as we've been going through some of these talks, I want to share a little story. Now, this is something that I ended up going to school. It was really interesting little side note here. I've been working in the health and wellness industries for 26 years, pretty much my entire adult life. And yet, someone that works in the fitness space, you would think that maybe I've got a very deep background in fitness. Well, actually, I went to school for English literature and philosophy. Yes, that's probably why I still work in the fitness industry. But I loved one of the stories I heard in my early university days about one Ernest Hemingway. I imagine some of you have heard of that name because it's usually found on typical top literature of the last century. But there was a story of Ernest Hemingway. And him and his buddies were at the pub. Okay, they're all sitting around, sharing some rounds of drinks, and sharing a conversation because they were all avid authors, writers. And something as writers or as communicators, sharing a simple message, it's always the goal, but it's challenging. So what they did was they created a little challenge for all the guys sitting around the table. Who could write the most impactful short story within only a matter of minutes? And the winner would get free drinks all night. Here's the catch. They could only use 6 words. 6 words, right? Can you write a complete story with a powerful message in just 6 words? I know when I first heard this, I was like, I don't think so. You know, that would be really, really challenging. Ernest Hemingway ended up, want to know what his 6 words were? Let me share them with you. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. Whew. Let that land for a second. For sale, baby shoes, never worn. Now, does that not capture a powerful visualization, right? Like capture a very powerful, impactful, and it's a very sad visual. 6 simple words, yet it captures an entire story. And a story that we can fill in the blanks very quickly because of the imagery that's used. Baby shoes that are on sale, but they're brand new, never worn. Who's selling those shoes? You know, like this creates curiosity and very amazing and powerful use of simple language put together in just the right context can create such a powerful message and really bring people in. Here's some other ideas around this. When I started looking this up, and I invite you to go to Google, type in 6-word stories. You'll be surprised at some of the just ingenious storytelling that people have done with just simple words. I awoke to the sirens again. I'm single, said my wife. Blonde parents, dark daughter, genetics undiscussed. Like, oh man, I don't know about you, but I'm a big fan of language, you know, and using the right words for the right reasons will often produce the right results or action or invitation. 6 simple words. There's a challenge for you. Take an idea that you want to share with the world, and how can you tell it most effectively using only 6 words? Whew, that is a challenge, isn't it? All right. So we talked about structure. I'm going to recap sort of everything we've talked about, and then we'll get into some more Q&A in a second. But I want to just talk about a little bit around structure, because I know this definitely challenges a lot of us. I know I used to struggle with structure a lot. It's where I do spend a lot more time today on, and especially after doing a TEDx talk. It was literally from the time where I subscribed. I was basically invited to apply to be a speaker out of 300 applicants, and we had to have a draft of our talk. And I know my very first draft, it was okay. I thought it was pretty good, but it's a personal story, so we have that bias, right? I'm like, it's my story, so I think it's pretty good. And but you have to think about the audience, and you got to think about who's going to hear it. And I know my structure wasn't really dialed in, but it had a good idea. And it was a good enough idea that I was given an opportunity to then try out and do a talk. And I'm not here to talk about the TEDx experience, but if Tal's open to it, I'd love to do a future talk and just talk about the whole experience and how you too can go out and do your first TEDx talk. Anyways, structure. Only give them what they need to know. Don't worry about adding in a lot of extra. If it's extra stuff and it doesn't really make sense, and what I always say is, imagine you didn't say that. Would it affect the overall presentation at all? If the answer is no, take it out. Best to just get rid of it, right? Oh, I see brown girl shower. Beach, palm tree, you, and a drink. Oh, I like that. Good story. Good story. I love that. Oh, oops. All right. Jargon is okay if you know your audience and the audience. So just as an example, I remember going to a conference about 2 years ago. And it was a tech conference, but I was invited to be a speaker, but to talk about lifestyle habits. And really, us as entrepreneurs, especially digital entrepreneurs, we know we spend a lot of time sitting behind our computers. And so here I was invited to give a lifestyle talk. And I was very fortunate enough that I was able to sit in on some other talks. And I heard this talk by a gentleman talking about coding. And coding and user experience, using a lot of language that I had no idea what he was talking about. But I wasn't his audience. He wasn't writing that talk for me. I just happened to be sitting there. And the people that were there, though, were fellow people within his industry. So this is where jargon is acceptable. But remember, who's your audience? Who's sitting in the chairs? Will this make sense? And then the couple, I know you've had an opportunity to read these, but storytelling. All right. That is the biggest thing that I feel anybody and everybody, if you can tell more stories in your talks, you're going to be making more impact. You're going to be connecting with more individuals. You're going to have better conversations post presentations, because the storytelling piece, that personal story or your observations, is what we all can relate to most. So really get in on that. And then lastly, just another one to point out, focus on the benefits and the consequences, right? So the benefits of adopting maybe your idea or spreading. What's the consequences of not adopting your idea? Not simply just talk about the idea itself and its basic features, because we want to understand, well, what's the point, right? Don't we all want to know, well, what's the point of adopting this new way of being? Is this really going to help me? Because everybody underneath it all, we all have an ego, and we often have this little subconscious question always going on in our heads. What's in it for me, right? And I don't know if you guys can relate to that, but it really ultimately comes down to it. Remember, we're all fighting for intention. We want to know if I'm going to give my attention to this talk, to stop my scroll, right? There was a good enough hook. I stopped it. Now you've got my attention. Keep it. And that's what we got to work for as speakers. Heather Blackwell. Oh, yes. Thank you. Heather just made a great comment. She mentioned John Maxwell and Stephen Covey. And, super interesting. They brought up John Maxwell. I was at a conference, again, maybe 15 years ago, and he was one of the keynoters. And it was such an inspirational talk, but he talked a lot about his own personal journey and just how he's showing up today. And some of the things that he was talking about was around the leadership. It was all about how to be a more effective communicator and leader. And it was just amazing because he was talking about his own personal struggles and his journey to getting to where he was. And so it was just awesome because it took a really vague and very broad concept, but made it very personable and easy for myself. And I know the thousands of people that were in the audience also resonated with that. Now, as we start to move on, I want to talk about this call to action. Because ultimately we're giving a talk, and usually there's an invitation or an action or something that we're wanting for the audience to do or adopt. we usually want to close our remarks, our talks, with some sort of call to action. And I don't mind that, and there's some amazingly powerful calls to action that I'm sure all of us can recall. If you think about the last time you made a major purchasing decision, was there an ad that you saw? Was there a friend that gave you a little referral? Was there a little thing that gave you that extra bit of confidence to just take that next step? Because remember, clarity makes confidence. If we have confidence, easier to take action. So as a speaker, were we able to help with the first two? Because making number 3, that little invitation, works really well if we've done so. Let me just put it this way. When you're inviting someone, it's just the language that we use. So often I'll invite people to do something that they're probably already thinking that they want to do. As an example, I've been talking a lot about storytelling today. If you as a speaker, a presenter, a facilitator wants to truly connect with your audience on a very deep level, personal stories always work. Think about one of your most recent challenges or struggles that you had to work through. What was that experience like? What did you learn as you were enduring and working through that challenge? And after you made it through to the other side and you have an opportunity to look back on what you just did, what are you thinking? What are you feeling? If you were to share that, and I invite you to share that story, but then at the end of that, invite someone to take the first step that you took in overcoming that challenge. Maybe invite them to reach out to you if they want support or help with overcoming that same challenge that they're now dealing with. But if you invite them to do something for themselves, it's way more powerful than saying, hey, you ought to go do this. It's like we all know we ought to exercise a little more. We all know we ought to eat a little bit healthier. We don't need to be told that. But if we're shared a personal story that inspires us to want to do more of that, and then we have this great speaker that's also added a little bit of confidence to us and clarity, and he invites us to do it as well, it's a little bit easier to now have that confidence in ourselves to move forward. So just think about the language around how you invite versus ask or tell. So let's recap real quick here. We talked about the hook. That's what's going to get their attention. We talked about the main idea, right? The specific subject of your talk, and how does that run throughout the entire talk? The message itself, you need to state it and restate it. You'll notice that today I've mentioned simplicity many times. I've talked about being concise, talked about using your language very specifically, challenging you, inviting you to use less to create more. Then there's the theme. That's what creates the interest. You could use an image, a metaphor, maybe just one single word that unifies throughout. Structure. Take some time to focus on the logic, right? If it doesn't make logical sense for you as the speaker, trust me, the audience, it won't make any sense either. And again, we lose their attention. We lose the engagement. Make your logical case for the message. And then lastly, invite, right? Not tell. Include your audience in the message. Let them be a part of it. Let them envision themselves as if they were adopting the idea and now making it their message. That's how ideas are spread. So as I close out today, you notice I'm using a quote from a pretty cool dude. I think we'll all agree. You can't explain it simply. Don't understand it well enough. There's a little story about Einstein I'd like to share with you. There's one day Einstein was asked by a pesky reporter to describe his theory of relativity in as few words and as simple as possible. Now, obviously, we know that the theory of relativity isn't a very simple idea or concept to understand. So you can imagine how Einstein was feeling with this reporter now coming up to him, the guy that's known for this theory of all things, and invited to try to explain it for me as the dummy. He responded with the following story. A man was asked by a blind man to describe the color white. The man said, "White is the color of a swan." The blind man said, "What's a swan?" The man said, "A swan is a bird with a neck." The blind man asked, "It's crooked." The man was becoming impatient. He grabbed the blind man's arm, straightened it, and said, "This is straight." Then he bent the arm and said, "And this is crooked." Whereupon the blind man quickly said, "Oh, yes, yes, thank you. Now I know what white is." Now, if you get the point of this story, it's really interesting because, sometimes we think that we're explaining things really simply and we use language that makes sense to us, but there's never a guarantee that the audience will receive it the way we intended. So, what does that mean to us as speakers, us as communicators? Well, what it means is we just got to keep practicing. We have to keep refining, keep challenging ourselves to refine the message to the simplest structure possible in the fewest words as possible. And just practice delivering, because you have a message to share. You have an idea to share, and you have impact to make in this world. So I invite you, start now, keep making impact, and just watch what happens. So thank you all extremely for showing up. Hope you took some notes and you found some of these useful tips helpful for yourself in your own presentations. But I'd like to move it over to Q&A now. I'm going to stop the screen sharing. Tal, if you wanted to return, you're welcome to come back. But I see some amazing comments in there. Some really neat observations from people. But I'll throw it back to you, Tal.
Yeah, so thank you so much. I think it was an amazing presentation. Feel free to ask questions now, and we'll try to answer about BIGVU or about the presentation. In the meantime, I will just send you Dave's information and also BIGVU's information if you want to contact us. And you can just go by the comments that we had.
Chat in there.
Yeah, this one, for example.
Oh, yes. I think that's so powerful. Inspire, not motivate. Yeah, if you think about this, everybody, inspiration versus motivation, right? Motivation usually has to do with something outside of us. We're motivated by some external goal, where inspiration often refers to the internal, that intrinsic thing that gets us excited, that connects us with whatever that thing is that we're about to do. So it is pretty neat, right? When it comes from that place of inspiration versus just simply trying to be motivated. And I think that's a great point and something that all of us can strive to do more of as speakers.
Yes.
No problem, Zara. Yes. I can't see all the chat, but I know there's lots.
Yeah, we just got a lot of thank you and great presentation.
Amazing. And like I was saying, Tal, if there's interest and people are interested and you'd like to learn more about TEDx and how to prepare yourself and go after a TEDx event, it was on my vision board for 7 years. 7 years before I was finally able to tick that box.
I think we'll do that.
Yeah. I think it'd be a lot of fun. Ah, great. What is it?
Yes.
Relevant to the content. That great question from Maurice there. He's asked, does story need to be relevant to the content, i.e. a post or channel? Well, not necessarily. This is something that's really unique, Maurice, because I'm just going to use myself as an example. Across my platforms, I talk a lot about different stuff, like just lots of different topics. It's not really just any one theme. There's multiple themes, but they're all themes that I'm interested in. They're all things that are very relevant to my life. And so I just sort of share that content or create content that speaks to the things that I'm experiencing and learning, my observations. But that's how my platform has been set up. It's me as the face of my own brand because it's just me. However, if you're a company or a brand that has very specific messages, very specific language, because you have a very specific audience to speak to, it may not make sense from a context standpoint to share stories that are way outside that scope. And I'm just going to use a very simple example. Let's just say you're an individual that's a professional golf athlete. Well, you're sharing stories about people and their journey into golf. Well, all of a sudden you started talking about some inspiring hockey players, or a hockey specific event. If your audience is all golfers, they may not relate to that story. So it's up to you, though, to bridge them. And that's where us as speakers, it's not to say you can't do it. Just make sure you help them make logical sense of why you're sharing that story. How does that make sense or fit into the whole structure of what you're presenting or talking about? I hope that makes sense. Does that make sense, Maurice? If it does, you can comment below. But I know for myself, my previous company that I was a co-founder of, I exited out about 5, 6 years ago now. I had our corporate brand that I was developing, but then I had my personal brand. And believe me, we didn't share necessarily all the same belief systems. Okay. Even though I was a partner for the corporate brand, there were still some of my own personal beliefs that I felt weren't in complete alignment with the corporate one. So, me as one of the partners, it's not up to me to be able to share my personal views on the corporate brand. That's what my personal platform's for. And this is why you have to get pretty clear on the kind of language, but also the types of audiences that you're speaking to, and get clear on the themes that really they want to hear more of. Cool. I think that answers that question.
Yeah.
1,000 first dates, better adventures. I also incorporate my 15. Oh, great. Yeah, Heather was just sharing about some of the stories and how she intertwines stories into her journey on her podcast.
Yeah.
It's wonderful.
And also,
Super cool,
she's
Heather.
saying that she can see TEDx in her vision board. So
I love it. Well, reach out if you have any questions. Happy to help with that, or we'll just Tal, you and I will connect and set a date for that. So,
sure.
but if there's any other questions, please let me know. Otherwise, I know everyone's got busy days ahead, or potentially evenings. I know Tal, it's the end of your day, but feel free. You can reach out. I know Tal just shared my contact details. Happy to connect. I'm most active on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So if you use any of those 3 platforms, reach out, say hi, say hello. I'd love to know what your next story is that you're willing to share. And gosh, please do share them with me. I just love meeting people. So this would be wonderful. Oh, yeah. And you're welcome, Maurice. You're welcome. I just saw his comment there.
Great.
Cool.
So thank you again for this amazing workshop. And hopefully we'll do another one soon.
Woo! Oh, my handle, just my name, Heather, just at Manuel. And
Yeah.
I don't know if
I sent in the chat all the links for his website,
Perfect.
Instagram, LinkedIn, or everything. So feel free to use it.
Oh, and you know what? I'll answer one more question here because Brown Girls Travel just asked, once you know you have a message, how do you get into public speaking? Well, that's really interesting. Just so you know, I'm naturally introverted. 80% of my life is spent just with myself and with my family. But 20% of it, how I show up professionally is as an extrovert. I had to make that decision a long time ago because I felt I had a story. I had a message I wanted to share with people. And I knew the best way that I could share it was I just had to start getting in front of people and sharing. Now, I had a lot of fear there. And to be honest with you, if you felt my hands right now, they're pretty sweaty. My heart rate's speeding because I still get nervous, okay? It never goes away. And I don't think you ever want it to go away. It's what keeps us sharp, keeps us on our edge. And it also lets us know we're doing the right thing because it challenges us to continue to grow. But here was this thing. I knew I wanted to be able to tell more stories. I knew that I wanted to connect with people, but I didn't necessarily know how to do it. And I wasn't sure how I could practice that. That's when I discovered Toastmasters. Toastmasters, if anyone or everyone here has heard of it or not heard of it, I want you to go look it up. Toastmasters.org, full plug. I'm not affiliated. It's a nonprofit organization that's around the world, but it's a safe place to practice delivering talks and speeches and presentations. But the cool thing about Toastmasters is you also get constructive, positive feedback from the clubs. And this is a great way for us to learn and grow. And if I didn't join Toastmasters, I can honestly tell you 100%, no doubt in my mind, I wouldn't have been on that TEDx stage, nor would I be here today talking to you guys. That's how impactful that one decision to join that organization, it influenced my last 10 years drastically. So please, anybody and everyone, if you feel you've got a story to tell and you need some practice in telling it, find a Toastmasters club near you. Yes.
Thank you so much.
That's it.
Yeah. See you next time. Bye, everyone.
All right. Bye, everybody. See ya.